Africa, holding the position of birthplace of humanity, as well as numerous important resources, it has been the eye of many an empire, both foreign and domestic. In the beginning, it was dominated by local empires. These nations stretched out across the continent, utilizing economics as the crutch of their empires. They made numerous advances in the fields of technology and social policies. However, eventually these empires reached a state of what can only be described as critical mass. They reached a point in which territorial expansion simply was too costly. If they expanded their borders, they risked not being able to control the new territories and losing them, which would inevitably lead to a loss in profit. If they, however, maintained the status quo, they would be able to mutually profit off of one another, with each empire holding a specific form of trade. As such, they entered in an easy peace, a pseudo-Cold War, if you will, in which the status quo was maintained for centuries. While this created a form of, near peace amongst them, in which you only had to worry about raiders without any form of war, it also stunted technological development in a way. As time went on, the various empires in the region became decadent and complacent. There was no need to advance, hence they didn't advance, a mistake which eventually proved fatal. In the early 1800s, the Dutch began to settle colonies within southern Africa. These colonies acted as crucial trading posts and resupply centers, providing the Dutch with a lot of wealth. The profit generated by the Dutch colonies garnered the attention of many of Europe's larger empires, resulting in a push to settle colonies within the region. Contrary to popular belief, the colonization of Africa was an economic endeavor, not a military one. The major European empires had taken heavy losses in previous invasion attempts of Africa. They wouldn't want to engage in all-out war with the Africans this time around. It would simply cost too much money. Also, one must note that the initial objective wasn't to set up colonies or gain long-term territory in the region, but rather to simply make short-term profits by selling the African people their goods. The most notable examples would be the introduction of modern firearms in exchange for slaves. The introduction of modern firearms to the African economy by European traders ended the pseudo-Cold War previously discussed, with many empires now going to war with one another due to the fact that the cost of expansion was now significantly reduced, and because they now needed more resources and slaves to sell to European traders to further expand their economies. Some nations would even join the European empires, becoming protectorates or building themselves under puppet governments in an attempt to gain access to the resource base of the greater empire. Other nations would be annexed forcefully by European powers desperate to gain their own colonies and footholds in the region. By this point, the economic values of permanent colonies had settled in. It wasn't so much a luxury to have colonies, but rather a requirement to maintain legitimacy as an empire. As such, more European nations than ever ventured into Africa at this point. This left African nations with a difficult choice. They had to join an empire in order to continue to receive goods or avoid annexation, but if they joined the wrong empire, they may find themselves in the crosshairs of more powerful foes. The wrong decision would oftentimes lead to the devastation of entire peoples. Many nations fell. Some countries were able to successfully repel borders, such as Ethiopia, or during some time periods Egypt, but these victories were few and far between. The bloodshed came to a relative end at the Berlin Conference, in which European nations met to draw finalized borders within the continent of Africa, as well as decide upon what exactly constitutes a colony. Many saw this as the end to a period of confusion and death. However, many more saw this as a final insult by the European invaders. These new borders were drawn without consent from African states, resulting in many being grouped together with those they despised, or those who did not speak the same language or didn't share the same culture, resulting in decades of discord and unrest in the region. There are many who hold the European population solely responsible for many of the issues gripping large portions of Africa as of today, but one must note that it is far more complex than that. Initially, it was the Africans who bought European weaponry and turned it against themselves instead of uniting against a greater foe. It was the Africans who allowed themselves to become economically reliant on the Europeans. Ultimately, though, it was the Europeans who allowed the Africans to join their empires in good faith, then turned their back on them, handing their territories up as though they were cutting cake. It was the fault of both factions. There was no one organization or group to blame. Otherwise, we'll be giving the European powers far too much credit and the African powers far too little.